Hey everyone, this is DeagleBeagle. I figure I'm gonna show you my most current VGC 23 Series 2 tier list of the top tier Pokemon, or I should say top tier list. And you'll see why I have these Pokemon as top tier. So again, I'm gonna just say it's Pokemon that do pretty well by themselves without really needing much support from allies. So you'll even see certain Pokemon later that you would traditionally call as top tier, like Pelipper, actually not be top tier, and I'll explain most of that later. But it's because a Pokemon just by itself, like Pelipper, wouldn't be that good. I mean, it could be all right for your team, like for reducing fire damage and whatnot, but you probably need something with like Swift Swim or a certain kind of team around it for it to be worth it. Okay. Even though before you didn't, like in series, well, let's just go to Pelipper really quick. In series, in series one, you didn't have these Pokemon like Iron Bundle or Iron Hands, but now the metagame shifted where you have a bulky Pokemon like Iron Hands with Wild Charge, and you have Iron Bundle everywhere. So Pelipper kind of needs Sash or needs to Terra or something now, or Protect or something to not get freeze dried. And we never had that problem in Series 1. Okay, I'll go to those Pokemon later. Now, Amoonguss, it's top tier, of course, especially with open team sheets. It's really not bad. You can kind of just try to spore stuff, and if they like Tera Grass to try to wall it, then you can hit them with a Flare Blitz with your Arcanine or whatever to super affect their grass Pokemon. Um, Redirection is really nice, and it resists Fairy. I would recommend probably Mental Herb with it so you don't get taunted and you have a consistent way to spore. Because if you can't spore, a Moongus is probably not going to be super good, even though you could heal your ally with Pollen Puff or switch out. Okay, Annihilate, that one, I was going to take off the top tier list because it just feels like it just sits there. And even if it does go for bulk up, you can just hammer their ally and keep doing that, and by the time it gets enough bulk ups, it's really not worth it. I mean, especially if you ignore it. But if they protect with their ally, that's what changed my mind to keep it as top tier, because actually this used to be what some people like Joe UX9 used to say was like possibly the best Pokemon, because we didn't know how to counter it. Like Rage Fist is a broken move in the sense that it can be way too overpowered, and it's just too easy to get it high power. Like you can get it high power really quickly. So Annihilate is top tier. I'd say mostly because their ally can protect. If their ally can't protect, then you can just hammer them and beat Annihilate. But if they protect, then it makes it like a prediction guessing game. And then Arcanine, of course, you can just, I call them Arcanine bots. These people that just spam Arcanine, like, I guess I'm not saying they're all brain dead that use Arcanine because it is a legitimate strategy, but it just seems like they just like click buttons like or just spam intimidate and then just click snarl over and over again, and like you can or Will-O-Wisp or whatever, and you can just do pretty well just like spamming stat drops like that, lowering their stats or having their attack with the Will-O-Wisp. So that's why I had to eventually use something to counter like competitive Kilowattrel or Gothitelle. Anyways, Arcanine's obviously one of the best intimidators because it's not weak to fairy. You'll see later why certain Pokemon are not top tier. Being fairy weak doesn't mean it's for sure not top tier. It just means since fairy moves are way more common now than they used to be when there wasn't Flutter Mane, that any fairy weak Pokemon, like a fairy weak Intimidator, is probably not going to be that good. So Armarouge is technically top tier. There are a lot of counters for it, but it can have a lot of offensive potential, or even if it doesn't, it could at least get up a Trick Room or something, or use Armor Cannon, even if you can't use Expanding Force to great effect because they have so many dark types, or Terra Dark or whatever, or who knows. So the next one, Azumarill. That Pokemon is probably barely top tier. So if I used it personally, I don't know about Assault Vest, maybe, but because it is pretty survivable. But I would probably use it for a different niche. It's a bigger niche, I think, is the slow or regular speed Perish Song one, because you're already slow naturally. So hopefully you can outspeed that. You can underspeed them. So if it's their two Pokemon versus your two, you can hopefully win the Perish Song fight. But with it being more common of having low speed Pokemon like Amoonguss and Garganacl, I think are becoming ever more common. Well, they were even common in Series 1, but I mean, like, stuff like that, I don't know. It just seems really common, or Gastrodon now, that we didn't really see in Series 1. So the chances of you doing well with Azumarill when there's like Gastrodon, or just slower Pokemon in general when you're just trying to use Perish Song, that I don't know if it is technically great overall, but it doesn't seem bad, so I'll leave it up here. Baxcalibur. The problem I have with Baxcalibur is loaded dice is not a consistent item unless you're just content with it only hitting 4 times. But it being a 50% chance of hitting 5 times or 4 times, that means like that could make that one extra hit could make the difference between killing something and not. So I don't know about Baxcalibur having an item like loaded dice, because you could just use Icicle Crash with Life Orb, and that would technically do more than if it just hit 4 times with Icicle Spear with loaded dice. So, Baxcalibur, it doesn't seem bad, but it being fairy weak and just, I don't know, it just seems like more Pokemon super affected, or maybe they don't. It just seems like that to me. That it seems like it's still good, but it's not. Maybe it's barely top tier, but it's not like top of the top tier, whatever you call that, S tier. Okay, Dragonite is, I tried it out, and I don't know why Dragonite just feels like it's not as good as it was in Series 1. It being fairy weak and not hitting back certain Pokemon in the metagame hard, like Fluttermane, you would have to use like Terra Flying or something with it to hit Fluttermane or something for decent damage. And I don't know, in Series 1 it just seemed way better. You still could use it with like Assault Vest, Ice Spin, or whatever, or something else. Now, if you use it now, I might even suggest I don't know, it's hard to say Inner Focus or not because of all the Arcanine running around. But well, you're a lot more common to see Arcanines now with Will-O-Wisp that you probably wouldn't have, for some reason, seen before. So I think Dragonite's for sure worse than it used to be from all the meta changes. But it's still barely top tier. Dondozo, I'm gonna say it's top tier, but only if you can somehow beat the common stuff people used to beat it, like Haze or Perish Song. If you have like Revival Blessing or something, then maybe it's still worth it. But otherwise, I don't know, because I used it, and you couldn't just willy-nilly win games with Dondozo very consistently. I was getting Perish Song and Haze left and right. Seems like everyone has a counter for it. So I don't really want to make it top tier, but to be fair, I'm not an expert Dondozo player. If you are, then I could see it being top tier. So I'm just going to leave it in top tier, but tell you that I don't think it's that good unless you're really good at using it. Okay, Frigg Giraffe is for sure top tier. Its ability is amazing. You can protect your allies even if they're flying or levitating with Frigg Giraffe, and you being able to fake out with your ally but them not being able to fake out could be a huge advantage, even though Psychic Train is really common anyways, but it's still a really good Pokemon. It has that niche over in DD. Fluttermane, that's among the best Pokemon. It's really good all around, except its defense is low. That's its main problem. You can one shot it with a lot of physical attacks, so I would use bulk or sash or something on it, maybe, or just use specs and try to take out their physical or other attackers before they hit you, or I used Follow Me Mouse Hold with it. So Fluttermane can be pretty good. Garganacl, um, for some reason I haven't had a lot of success with it because it's so passive and it's so against my style. But I have seen it do pretty well, and it has been annoying versus me. But I never see it. Almost never do I see it do that well, though. So I almost want to take it off top tier. But it being having a great ability and being hard to kill, if you play really right and take out their Pokemon that can kill it, then it could win battles, especially if you use like Glamour and you just stall with it. So it depends, but I'd say Garganacl's the type of Pokemon that unless you are really good at using it, it's probably not going to do very well. Okay, Gastrodon, that Pokemon is top tier. It has great defensive typing. Well, actually now it doesn't because of Freeze Dry. But if you are willing to use a Tera to improve it against the Iron Bundle matchup, like Tera Fire, then they can't super affect you with Freeze Dry or even hit you with Hydro Pump. So it's pretty good, but you having to use a Tera just to beat something, I don't know if that makes it worth it or not. It makes it like Gastrodon. Let's just ignore Iron Bundle for a minute. Gastrodon outside the Iron Bundle matchup is still pretty good. Even if it didn't have Storm Drain, it would still have good defensive typing, good stats, a good check to Trick Room teams, especially the ones that don't use min speed. I mean slower speed than Gastrodon, but even the ones that are slower like Mudsdale and Torkoal, it can super affect those. So Gastron's pretty good defensively and offensively, but it's more vulnerable now if you want to just use it on the switch in. You could get freeze dried on the switch in. So if you were to use it, I would recommend leading with it, Tera Firing from the start, or maybe not if you don't see an Iron Bundle and you don't think they have it in the back. It's up to you. You'll have to figure that out. But Gastrodon is still going to be top tier, even if it's not a brain dead switch encounter to Iron Bundle like some people make it sound. And then Gengar, I'm mostly leaving Gengar up because, yes, Fluttermane usually does outclass it, but it having haze and poison typing offensively and defensively, that could be an advantage. More offensively because you would probably want Sash, but you can actually run Terra Dark's Scarf. Gengar knew pretty well with it. Okay, Glamora, that's good for mostly, I'd say, its ability because it is 4 times weak to ground and whatnot. So Glamora, with Toxic Debris, getting the Toxic Spikes up, and then you later having Garganacl or whatever could be pretty good. Even without that ability, you could at least do something with it, like Sledge Bomb or Power Gem or whatever. And then Grimmsnarl, I was almost wanting to take it out of top tier, thinking that everyone's going to use like a Specs Flutter main when I won that tournament with it, but apparently not, because you can still counter the Specs Flutter main mouse hold lead because people figure out how, like with Mental Herb, Amoonguss, or whatever. So, anyways, long story short, Grimmsnarl is still useful, but there's a lot of teams that may counter it. You could still do alright with it, though, and it is good versus Indeedee Armorooch, so I'm going to leave it in top tier. Gothitelle, it seems like the Shadow Tag one is top tier. I don't know about the competitive one. I don't think the competitive one is necessarily top tier yet because I tried it out outside of a hard Trick Room team, and it wasn't that good because, well, if they didn't boost you, that is. If they just boosted you, then yeah, but if they're smart and they just don't use Arcanine when you have a Goth on your team or Iron Bundle, then yeah. But even though you can mess them up if you force them to not be able to pick Iron Bundle, but it's probably not such an inconvenience that it makes it top tier. So I'd say the Shadow Tag one that was pretty good with like Perish Song. So I'm gonna put that one in top tier. Great Tusk is, I would say, top tier. Even though I feel like people overrate it in the sense that they think it's the best ground Pokemon ever, and it's not. Sandy Shocks is better overall because it's a special attacker. It doesn't get intimidated. Will-O-Wisp doesn't affect its damage output. It has more, has good stats all around, and Great Tusk lowers its defenses with close combat and headlong rush. So that's a big drawback. And then if you use Sash, they could just break it with like Fake Out. So there's no real way to solve all of Great Tusk's problems. You need a lot of support from your allies, like a Defiant ally or whatever. Because if you run Clear Amulet, then you don't have Sash or Assault Vest. And it's like, you run, okay, let's say you run Lum to get rid of the Will-O-Wisp, then you're still going to be hit hard on the special side and not have Sash or anything to deal with it. So, my opinion, I would use Sash with Great Tusk and just try to have Protect with it to block against the Fake Out, and have an ally, and have Terra Fire with it, plus an ally that possibly deters Arcanine from coming in. Even though Arcanine, it does super affect Arcanine with Headlong Rush, so you don't absolutely need like a Defiant ally with it. But it's top tier. It's good at walling physical Pokemon, especially like Lycanroc Tar type of teams. Now, Hatterene, that is really an underrated Pokemon. I won a tournament with it. Other people have gone in like second with it, like Alex Soto in Liverpool. It is amazing and hard Trick Room. Great coverage, sets up Trick Room. It benefits off of Psychic Terrain. If this thing had Expanding Force, it would be way better probably than Armarouge is. Everyone would be using it. It would be the replacement for Armarouge. But I personally think it's higher tier than Armarouge because it's harder to wall a Fairy move. Like, nothing is immune to Fairy. And Fairy is good with Psychic because if they have a Dark type Pokemon, you can just Dazzling Gleam them, like a Roaring Moon or something. But for Armarouge, it doesn't have as good offensive coverage. People don't really prepare for a high-powered Dazzling Gleam in Trick Room. Okay, Iron Bundle, that is top tier, but I'm going to say only if you don't use Hydro Pump, because Hydro Pump just misses too much. So if you use Blizzard, or I don't know, you use some other move, so without Hydro Pump, it sounds like you should use Hydro Pump with it, but it just misses too much. So I personally wouldn't recommend it. Okay, Iron Hands. By the way, I didn't cover Iron Bundle. It's good for outspeeding almost everything. It has like one of the highest speeds in the game, like Draga, Pult, and Electrode, I think, might be the only faster Pokemon than it. So, yeah, it's really good because of that. Iron Hands, you have a lot of bulk with Iron Hands. Good stats overall, great stats, and Fake Out, and etc. So, it's obviously one of the best and most used Pokemon. Iron Moth, there's a lot of different things with it. You could run Toxic Spikes with a Dondozo type team or Garganacl team. You could Acid Spray, Sludge Wave, whatever, or just use Scarf with Struggle Bug, even though Volcarona might be better for that. But it has good stats, and overall it has good typing to counter Flutter Mane and other things like Sylveon. So it definitely has a niche. It's top tier. Indeedee female is top tier. It's among the best. I use it on like every team because Psychic Terrain is so useful for blocking Fake Out, for boosting your own Psychic moves, for redirection. The Indeedee is good for. So it's just good all around. It's like a catch-all counter to a lot of things with the Psychic Terrain and the Follow Me. So if they want to just spam like beat up with with their ally, like Mousehold Ape or something that shuts that down, lots of things down, gimmick type stuff down. So you having all that is just really good, in Trick Room too. So it's one of the best Pokemon in the game. King Ambit, I think it's not as good as it used to be. It used to be it seems like it used to be better, but everyone's been running lately like a fighting move with like low kick you could run on almost anything to force it to have to Tera. So I'm not necessarily a big fan of King Ambit. It is definitely a good Pokemon and it's definitely top tier. It's just I don't normally recommend things that have 4 times weaknesses, even though I have used Tyranitar and stuff in the past. But that's usually been with like Follow Me, Redirection support, or whatever. And it has King Ambit's not as good when you have Follow Me support because it's a single attacker. Tyranitar has Rock Slide and stuff, so it's a little bit different. But still top tier. Terrafire and other Terras are good with it to block Wisp and Flare Blitz damage. And then Rock seems like it's pretty good even outside of sand. You can kind of use Rock Slide and get a flinch with it or whatever, and you can do a lot of damage with Choice Band. You could use Sash, but I like Choice Band, even though you're more weak to like Wide Guard with it. And then Mousehold is definitely top tier. It having Friend Guard and Follow Me makes it so useful for either like Annihilate or Specs Flutter Mane or whatever Pokemon that's really fast and powerful, but they can easily kill. That's why I think the Mousehold Fluttermane lead of mine, that I didn't come up with that lead, but I improved it. So I essentially pioneered how you're supposed to use it with Helping Hand and Feint and whatnot. But that, yeah, Mousehold's good for other Pokemon too. Metacam is alright. It's a good fake outer and it's somewhat powerful, but on average, it doesn't counter that many Pokemon besides like Iron Hands and stuff. And you can super affect a lot of Pokemon in the meta, like Tyranitar or whatever. So it's not bad, but just assume that you're probably going to do neutral damage with it. You could be intimidated, you could be Will-O-Wisp with it, but it having Fake Out is really the only reason why it's top tier. It does have a lot of attack too, so it has that going for it, but it has somewhat low speed, and yeah, probably use Bullet Punch with it. Mimikyu, that Pokemon is still pretty good. Disguise is a good way to get up Trick Room or to get off an attack without dying. So you could do pretty well against the meta. Like, I'm worried about Play Rough missing, but if it hits, it's pretty good. You could like definitely like use Shadow Claw or whatever on a Fluttermane, then Shadow Snake it to finish it off. Or Play Rough is good coverage too with Ghost. Okay, Roaring Moon. That one is 4 times weak to Fairy, but that's not the end of the world because you could Terra change your typing to whatever it is, Fire or Flying with Acrobatics, and have it do pretty well. Great stats overall. So really not a bad Pokemon, even though yeah, originally it was kind of overrated if you're just using it as a Tailwinder, unless you have Booster Energy to boost its speed. But it having a 4 times weakness and a weakness to a lot of things, being forced to Terra a lot, if you're fine with that, but if you're not fine with tearing it a lot to both survive attacks and to do more damage, then you might want a different Pokemon, but it's still pretty good. You can counter Indeedee Armourouge with it too if you somehow take care of the Dazzling Gleam issue. So either Wide Guard or something, Ally, Snarl, something. Okay, Sandy Shocks is one of the best Pokemon in the game. It might be like not the best, well, one of the best Pokemon in the game. So it's hard to say exactly what tier it is. I would have to look at all these other ones, but it's probably for like in the top 3 for how good it is, because believe it or not, because you can just it's like the best ground attacker overall, and you can Volt Switch with specs that have been doing really well with it, or use Booster Energy. and put a lot of offensive pressure against their team. But it having a lot of weaknesses is probably its main drawback. But if you have speed control with it, it's very good. Okay, Sylveon, that one is pretty good. It has a lot of bulk, and you can use throat spray or whatever, or specs or something with it, with hyper voice, and do pretty well. So it's just all around a good Pokemon. I personally, though, I might use something like that, but probably only if I have screen support like Grimmsnarl. Otherwise, I'm probably just gonna use a faster Pokemon like Fluttermane and do that. Okay, Staraptor, believe it or not, is a top tier Pokemon. It has Scarf oftentimes with Final Gambit and Brave Bird and stuff, and you can just like keep U-turning out and in and spamming Intimidate, possibly even better than like Arcanine or something. So it is actually one of the only good Intimidators. It can outspeed Fluttermane and well, it depends on how much HP you use with it. If you want to make it better for Final Gambit, then you would use max HP. I use max HP with it, but if you want to kill Fluttermane, you might have to sacrifice some HP for it and Brave Bird that thing and one-shot it, outspeed it. So it's up to you. But Staraptor is, I'd say, clearly a top-tier Pokemon. I've seen it used really well, especially with like Frig Giraffe or whatever. You can't fake out it. It can just cycle in and out. And it has really good complementary typing with like Iron Hands or whatever they were using too. So Talonflame, top tier. It's probably the best Tailwinder right now because it has a priority Tailwind and it has other good things with it too, like a priority Brave Bird, which is really amazing, and good coverage, decent coverage with Flare Blitz. So I'd probably recommend Life Orb with Talonflame. And then Tatsugiri, of course, with the Dondozo combo. Tyranitar is one of the best Pokemon, really underrated. It counters almost every team, or at least checks it. Like, it checks weather, it checks Indeedee Armarouge. It's very hard to kill with a special Pokemon, especially. It can be Wisp and whatnot, but that's one of its only drawbacks. Overall, it's just a really good Pokemon, and it even super affects Arcanine, which is the most common Intimidator with like a Rock Slide. So, I think the last one is Volcarona. This Pokemon is really underrated, especially in the current metagame where there's so many bug weeks like Indeedee, Gothitelle. There's even some Brute Bonnet, but that's not that common. There's I'm thinking mostly of Indeedee and it doing neutral to most Armarouges, and a lot of people using Tera Grass, so it's gonna do neutral to that even if they Tera Evolve. So it could be really good, like in this metagame. And Quiver Dance is pretty underrated, even though they have Icy Wind. So I don't know. You might even want to use Scarf with it with Struggle Bug. And if you use Scarf with it, you outspeed Iron Bundle. And let me see. I think you can one-shot it with Overheat. Personally, I would use it for Scarf and spam Struggle Bug and other stuff with it. And you can even use Rage Powder with it and then stay in or switch if you have to, maybe, if that's what you want to do. Okay, Volcarona versus what was it? Iron Bundle. Iron Bundle has low special defense, so you're gonna Heat Wave even is gonna do a lot to it. Overheat, yeah, is easily gonna one-shot it, and you probably want not Timid on the Scarf one. You probably want Modest because you only need, what is it, 138 speed? What's 206? Yeah, so you only need 108 speed to outspeed that, and then you could do the rest in bulk, or you could just make it have more speed if you want. But I would personally probably put the rest in bulk after you go past like a little bit past Iron Bundle speed, unless you need more than that. So this thing could actually be pretty good. So thanks for watching. Actually, no, I have to do these too. Sorry. The Pokemon that may not be top tier anymore, like I said, Dondozo Tatsugiri, unless you're really good at using it, and or you use Revival Blessing, because Hazer or Parasan can just counter that too easily. Flesh Ender's not that good anymore. It used to be a lot better when you could Will-O-Wisp something and keep roosting, and then kind of stalling them out because it's bulky with Eviolite, and you could also have a priority Tailwind with it and a priority Brave Bird and get your full HP back in Brave Bird. I personally haven't used it in a tournament, not because I thought it was really bad, but because it's not really my style. I like hyper offense, not Pokemon that are used kind of like Garganacl, where it does damage over time. And I didn't really want the Will-O-Wisp missing either. But I would say it's not a bad Pokemon, but it's getting worse and worse as more and more people are trying to counter Will-O-Wisp. So I guess most people think it was never top tier to begin with, and I can understand that argument. I just see it this way. It's one of the only like 3 usable Pokemon that get a priority Tailwind. So just that alone might make it top tier. But it also having a useful niche outside of that Talonflame doesn't have, which is a bulky Will-O-Whisper with Roost. That is its niche. If you don't think you need that, then maybe use Talonflame instead. I generally would recommend Talonflame instead, to be honest, but Flesh Ender definitely had and still has somewhat of a use, but you might want to use Talonflame instead. It's probably better. So that's why I moved it down off of the top tier list. Murkrow might be better than it too, even though I don't think Murkrow's even necessarily top tier anymore. I'll explain that later. Garchomp, so just because it's weak to Fairy, I don't think that's the only reason why it's not top tier, but like it might actually be top tier if Sandy Shocks becomes more common because it outspeeds that and can Earthquake it. But right now in the current meta, there's a lot of Fairy moves going around, and I know you could argue and say, well, Great Tusk is also weak to Fairy. How come you're not making that like not top tier? And maybe Garchomp is top tier, but you would have to probably run like a Sash with it or Assault Vest with it for it to be useful. And actually, maybe it is top tier if you run Sash or whatever with it, but it's just normally I would recommend. Yeah, I think I will actually make it top tier because it having the niche that Iron Tusk doesn't have of outspeeding and one-shotting like an Arcanine, and again it can outspeed and one-shot Sandy Shocks. I think I should move it up to top tier. But with Garchomp, I guess it is good versus Lycanroc Tar and stuff, but Great Tusk. One second, I gotta put this up here. Oh no, I'm just gonna type it in. Garchomp is, yeah, I guess it's barely top tier, but you would probably have to use Assault Vest with it. And then, oh, I was saying Great Tusk has a way stronger single attack move, and there's a lot of wide guards, so you'd have to use like Stomping Tantrum a lot of times with Garchomp. But overall, I suppose it's still barely top tier. But I would prefer like Sandy Shocks or something instead. Alright. It being Will-O-Wisp, by the way, is another problem. But you could say the same thing for other similar Pokemon, so I gotta keep it consistent, just make it top tier. It having high speed is good. Goldango, believe it or not, I think might not be even top tier. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but from what I've seen, I used it a lot, and just all these Pokemon resisted it, like Iron Hands, Gastrodon, Arcanine. I was like, it's not really doing that much anymore. Just like 2 weeks ago, it was doing really well still. But people are figuring out that, well, it's actually mostly a coincidence, is like why I think it's not really good, because a lot of the good Pokemon now happen to resist Steel, but I think over time too, more and more people are realizing that they need to counter Goldango because it's so crazy otherwise. The Wide Guard and all these things just counter it too well, so I think it's not quite top tier. But it used to be like arguably maybe the best Pokemon, but now I don't know. Gyarados, weak to Freeze Dry and Wild Charge. I wouldn't recommend it as an Intimidator. Even in Series 1, it wasn't necessarily that good, even though I have used it pretty well with Assault Vest and stuff. But For it to do well offensively with Dragon Dance, you probably had to use like Terra Flying with it and use a whole Terra just for that. So it usually wasn't that great. Okay, but especially with Freeze Dry and Wild Charge, like from Iron Hands, it's just not that good anymore. Iron Jugulus, it never was probably that good. It's just outclassed by other Pokemon normally. I mean, like, there's Roaring Moon or whatever that probably is going to be better for a dark type, flying type attacker. So I don't think I would use Iron Jugulus, but maybe if you're using if you're not trying to just kill stuff with it and you're just trying to snarl, maybe because it has better defensive typing than Roaring Moon. But I don't know. I don't think it's quite top tier. And Murkrow, it might be top tier because it does have a priority Tailwind, but I just think it doesn't do that much besides Tailwind and Haze. Like, Haze is really only mostly good for, I guess you could say, Goldango. I mean, and you could say physical attackers versus the Intimidate and stuff, but overall, Murkrow just kind of sits there, especially now in Series 2. There's so many Dark Resist. It just kind of sits there and doesn't do a lot, especially considering how Goldango's not that good anymore. That also makes Murkrow even worse because, like, it used to be at least, even if Murkrow sat there, it could really help its ally. But now I used it and it just didn't seem good. Like, it was good when Goldango was good, but now that Goldango's not that good, it's not that great anymore. Pelipper has the same problem that Gyarados has, being so commonly one-shotted and it not doing a lot of damage output. But if you have the right ally like Palafin or whatever, I could see it being top tier on the right team and using it for defense and, like, not defense, but in a sense using it defensively for your team, getting rid of your fire weakness and doing more damage with your water Pokemon. Now, Rotom Wash I don't think was ever top tier because it has the Hydro Pump problem that misses just like Iron Bundle. Also, Sableye, that is weak to Fairy. Grim is generally better than it unless you really need to be immune to like Fake Out or you need less weaknesses than Grim. But I would probably use Grimmsnarl personally. Just having better stats is going to be useful. At least has a chance of being more useful than Sableye. I'll put it that way. So even if Grimmsnarl is commonly super affected by something, it still has a chance of not being super affected by something if you bring it versus the right teams or use it in a certain way, even though you generally would want to lead with it. So Sableye still has a niche, but I don't think it's enough of a niche to make it top tier. It does have some neat tech moves and stuff, but it's probably not quite top tier. Salamence, it is weak to Fairy, so that's a huge drawback of it when you could just use like Arcanine and it'd be better versus the current meta. But certain things like whatchamacallit, it is good versus a lot of the rest of the meta, but they're so commonly like Freeze Dry. I meant to include that and Ice. Like Iron Bundle, Flutter Mane. You should assume that almost every team's gonna have like Flutter Mane and Iron Bundle. So Flutter Mane and or Iron Bundle. So Salamence just not a great Pokemon, but it's good. It's weak to stuff, a lot of common stuff. Tauros Fire, usually Arcanine has always been better than Tauros Fire, but I have used it before with Double Kick to one shot like Lycanroc and Meowscarada back when Lycanroc Tar was common. Now it's picking up usage again because people see it could be really good versus like Iron Bundle or just speed control in general. But Tauros Fire, until that becomes more common, Tauros Fire is probably not going to have a niche over Arcanine. Its main niche was not being weak to rock and or having double kick and possibly having a strong fighting move that Arcanine doesn't have. Tauros Water, it is fairy and freeze dry weak. So I don't know about that Pokemon anymore. That's why you haven't seen it used like at all lately. Torkoal, it's if you're using it outside a hard trick room, I would probably not recommend it because you boosting their attack or speed or whatever their boost is going to be when you give them sun, it's going to help them about as much as your team. So same with Pincursion. I don't have Pincursion. Oh, I don't have Pincursion in this list. So you could argue that those Pokemon were never top tier, but when I say not top tier anymore, I mean Pokemon that we realize, at least I realize, aren't really top tier anymore. But that I did use Torkoal in a tournament and win just yesterday. So Torkoal, it can be good on the right team. Same with a lot of these Pokemon that are considered not top tier anymore, like Dondozo. I think won a tournament recently. You have to use it on a specific team though. So it's not saying they're bad on every team, but you have to use it on a specific team. I used it on a specific team. I didn't just like use it in general. I used it on a hard trick room team. And then Dragapult actually used to be. I'm unsure if these Pokemon are top tier still. They were in Series 1, I would say. Meowscarada, Dragapult, Gallade. I used to use a Specs Modest Dragapult, but with Iron Bundle, you would have to use like a Specs Timid one. And with Sash being a common item on Iron Bundle still, even though I don't know why people are using Booster Energy with Iron Bundle more and more lately, because you could one-shot it with some special moves. I think they realized that it normally doesn't get one-shotted by anything, not quite, unless they use a powerful special attacker, and that can kind of be mitigated with. So Dragapult could actually be pretty well. Actually, if they're using Booster Energy or Sash, Dragapult would be countered by that. So I don't think this is top tier anymore because the two most common items counter it. Because they could just freeze dry you, and you would have to use like Sash to survive. And it just with Sash, it's not strong enough. Yeah, I'm gonna just take this off. I realize now it's actually not top tier, for sure not. Gallade, usually Gallade is outclassed by something like another psychic attacker, like just depends. In hard trick room it could be Hatterene. Outside of that it might be Metacam if you're using a Pokemon like Gallade and you want fake out. But Gallade has its main niche is sharpness, so you can do a lot of damage. And for the Psycho Cut and for the fighting moves, it does a little bit more, you could say, than Metacam, but it lacks the fake out. So its niche is really just doing a little bit more damage than Metacam and being more specially bulky. But overall, I just find that it tends to be mediocre and has the same problem that Metacam has. Never that great versus anything, even though it's decent versus Dondozo or it used to be better when they used to use like Iron Defense and you could Sacred Sword right through that. But now it's just, I mean, it is good versus Iron Hands and whatnot, but it's just, I don't know if it's top tier. I'm just afraid to wipe it off the list completely and forget about it, but I don't think it's quite top tier. If I did use it, I might use a Sash one with it, and just to be safe, so I don't have to Tera, unless that's not a big deal to Tera Fire, because you can be immune to Will-O-Wisp anyways. But with Intimidate and stuff, I don't know. Gallade just doesn't seem top tier, and Meowscarada, it being outsped by a lot of Pokemon now, like Iron Bundle and yeah, I'm just gonna remove these two Pokemon because on average they're almost never that great. Because Meowscarada gets countered by like Iron Bundle or Flutter Mate. I mean, just outspeeding it. So it's just not as good as it used to be. Sand is an issue for it too. Even though people used to use Tar before, but I don't believe it was near as common as it is now. Maybe I'm remembering wrong, but I think there's more of an incentive to use Tar now with all the Indeedee Armourouge being more common. They did actually use Tar a decent amount with Lycanroc Tar especially, but outside of that phase, I don't think we saw a ton of Tar. it's picking up usage because people realize how good it is. And Palafin, I would need to test it out more. It might be top tier. It might have always been top tier. I don't know. I haven't used it a lot, but just generally, I would say it's not, because yes, you can flip turn and bring it in later, and it is really good later. But like, you having to predictably lead it and flip turn or manually switch with it, that's like a whole turn you're wasting possibly by having to manually switch just so you can get a really good Palafin later. Like I don't know if that's quite worth it or not, especially when they can just use like Psychic Terrain and block your Jet Punch. So then you would be forced to like Wave Crash or something. So in my opinion, I am very skeptical that Palafin is top tier. But that being said, I think it is really great versus certain teams. You knowing with open team sheets who you can flip turn against, so it has really high potential. But I don't think it's quite top tier, but could be wrong. I gotta test it out more. But I'm fairly confident that the ones I raced like Meowscarada and Gallade are not top tier. So sure that I'm just gonna take it off the list. Okay, thanks for watching this long video. Check out my Discord where we talk more about all these things like team building and tiers and stuff. And check out some of these other YouTubers too that are posting great videos like Clover Bells and Edit, I think Submarinian or something like that. CK49 is his username on, at least on YouTube. So let me know in the comments section what you want me to cover next. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next video.